The story you're about to hear isn't about crypto, it's about power. The kind of power that doesn't win elections, it decides them. The kind of power that doesn't follow markets, it makes them. And at the center of this power sits one man, Peter Thiel. Thiel isn't just a billionaire, he's the deep state's technologist, a Stanford-bred intelligence asset whose companies power the surveillance architecture of the modern world. A CIA partner, an FBI informant, the architect behind Palantir, the data harvesting machine used by the entire Five Eyes Alliance, and Israel. Thiel has the eyes. Elon Musk, his oldest co-conspirator, has the vehicle. And together, they've been building the rails for a new digital order.
When I co-founded a technology startup, our goal was nothing less than to replace the US dollar by creating a new digital currency.
This doesn't start with crypto, it started with PayPal. Thiel and Musk's original vision wasn't a payments app, it was a plan to digitize the entire global financial system. They failed, but their dream never died.
Essentially, if done right, X would become, maybe half of the global financial system.
Thiel calls this era the Straussian moment, a Pax Americana enforced not with soldiers, but with surveillance. And while they build rockets, social networks, and spyware, they quietly began funding the companies that would rebuild the monetary system from the ground up. And one of those companies is Ripple. In 2013, Thiel's founder fund became a seed investor in Ripple, the plumbing for the coming digital financial system. Thiel had the intelligence rails, Musk had the communication rails, Ripple would become the payment rails. And it didn't stop there. In 2012, a year before that seed deal, Brad Garlinghouse was invited to Peter Thiel's secret tech conference, Dialogue. It's essentially the tech Bilderberg group, a secret gathering of 10 to 12 elites from government, military, and tech. 3 years later, Brad becomes CEO of Ripple. Coincidence? Maybe, but it shows something undeniable. Ripple's leadership has been swimming in the same waters as the architects of the new digital world since the beginning. And now, Thiel's political machine has moved into position. His protege, J.D. Vance, now sits in the White House. Vance says Thiel's lecture at Yale was the most significant moment of his life. Thiel made Vance. Vance is pro-crypto, and Ripple donated $50 million to Fairshake, the largest pro-Trump crypto PAC of the 2024 cycle. If everything goes to plan, Thiel's network has a 12-year runway to reshape the global system. Trump 24, Vance 28, Vance 32, and Ripple perfectly positioned to be the core infrastructure of that system. And now, fresh revelations. Documents show Peter Thiel in Epstein's network, from private dinners to funding corridors to intelligence-linked operations, another thread connecting the same elite circles that silently build global systems behind closed doors. We've recently seen the ideological pivot. For over a decade, Thiel, Tucker Carlson, Roger Ver all sold Bitcoin as the path to freedom. Now, every one of them suddenly declares Bitcoin compromised, infiltrated, co-opted by intelligence agencies. A narrative shift so abrupt, it reveals the truth. Bitcoin was the diversion. Ripple and compliant digital assets were the destination. Now, Thiel built the eyes, Musk built the network, Ripple built the rails, and together they form the backbone of the digital order rising beneath our feet. This is no longer about markets. This is about who will control the next system. And the evidence suggests very clearly that Ripple was chosen long ago. Welcome back, everybody, to part 2 in the Ripple Bible. The reception to part 1 was massive. This one is going to be even bigger. This episode, we go into the underbelly, the deep, dark depths of the abyss to figure out who is really behind this entire machine, how it works, and where we're heading. The topic at the forefront of your mind is probably, how do we get liberated out of this deep, insidious web? That will be addressed in part 3. We have references to it in scripture, and I am more confident than ever that God is going to flip the script on its head. But before we get there, we have to understand all the stuff that was elucidated in that lengthy introduction. We need to understand the Peter Thiel and Elon Musk universe. We need to understand the multi-decade-old intelligence ties that Ripple has back to even the Bush-era government. So without further ado, let's jump into the nitty-gritty components of this masterboard. So the first thing we have to understand about Peter Thiel's philosophy is that
He hates bloated, slow government, and he wants it to be run basically like a private company. And you can see how this has proliferated over time through the companies that he's a part of, in particular Palantir, and what they're doing within the geopolitical sphere. So, he kind of wants this public-private partnership, the mixture of state with Silicon Valley oligarchs. And when you bundle in Elon Musk as well, you start to see the vehicle behind it all. And we see this through the Echelon Five Eyes, the surveillance program that Palantir has its mitts across all over the world: Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the UK, and the United States. His vision is really sort of playing out in real time. Why is this important? Well, we know from our first part in the series that Peter Thiel was a very early investor in Ripple through his founders fund. We know Thiel comes from Stanford, a intelligence hotbed with a litany of other PayPal mafia members coming from Silicon Valley, right next to the intelligence agencies. We have In-Q-Tel as the funder of Palantir in its earliest days, In-Q-Tel being the CIA's VC firm. This all happened during the Bush era, which is going to be very important for later in this part when we look at the concrete links to key figures that are completely missed when it comes to the earliest foundations of Ripple's selection within intelligence circles and how it's manifested into modern day. We literally had Peter Thiel write about the Straussian moment, which is this idea that the only way America could retain its superpower status is through this intelligence regime. One of the most recent examples of this was when we had the flashy Doge come in and seemingly overhaul the back end of the government to make it more efficient. But really what we found was lots of former Palantir and Musk associates taking over these key roles. Think of it basically as this aggressive streamlining of the back end of the government in preparedness for the AI beast that's being created. Further affirmed by the big deal that Trump did with Larry Ellison's Oracle, a huge data harvesting company. The notion of this efficiency being for the benefit of the everyday person is becoming more and more far-fetched as time wears on. We also know that Thiel's obsessed with this battle between good and evil, and there's nothing more notable than all of his key companies and venture funds being named after Lord of the Rings. Very strange coincidence, but he's even publicly spoken about his obsession with Lord of the Rings and what it means to him. My guess is he's on the wrong side of the ledger when it comes to whether he's fighting for good or fighting for evil. I think it's abundantly clear where he sits. But that's going to be important when we look at some of the XRP links shortly. But what about his co-conspirator Elon? Because he plays a very important part in all this as well. Now, I get stuck a little bit with Elon because at the surface, he certainly doesn't seem as twisted or anti-humanity as, say, Thiel. But what we have to understand about these two individuals is that they are both relentlessly pursuing the advancement of the human race, whether that's off-planet, whether that's transhumanism, whether that's uploading consciousness to the AI. They are very far removed from God's natural order, which is super radical and dangerous, in my opinion. And this is when we start to get to the final component of the machine that they're building. We know that Elon has his fingerprints across many critical companies, Neuralink being one of the main ones that could genuinely alter the course of humanity once and for all. He has Starlink, which is a democratized, interconnected system that probably one day all of our phones will be connected to as well. He has X, the communication backbone of news and social media. Everything is being pulled within these two guys, and I don't think it's by chance. The final piece to their puzzle that they haven't quite cracked, but I think they will, is finance and payments. And we know this because they first tried to do it with PayPal, but it did not work. And we know that Elon in particular has been very public about his endorsement of changing the global financial system. We touched on this last episode, but the journalist Jimmy Sonny, who authored The Founders, chatted with Elon, and it's abundantly clear that he wants to change the financial system. We saw the clip in the intro that, if done correctly, X itself could become half of the global financial system. To truly have this tech oligarchism and dystopian world launched, you need to control payments. Much like what is written in Revelation, John says that there'll come a day where if you do not have the mark, you will not be able to buy or sell. The final kicker beyond the digital IDs is control of the financial system, the grid. Now, I'm not actually worried at all, and we'll get to that in robust detail in part 3, but it is important to see the calculated plan playing out in real time before the script gets flipped. So that to me is where these two are wanting to go. But let's look at some more concrete crazy links back to XRP before we then get into the administrative stuff, which further ices the top of the cake. The history here post-investment in Ripple 2012, 2013 is very interesting because this has been broadly brushed as a conspiracy, but the Thiel, Musk and Andreessen XRP wallets, in my opinion, is anything but a conspiracy theory. So right after the investment, we have in 2013 large amounts of XRP sent to these wallets that are linked to, I assume, this group, right? So through Musk, we had 16 million XRP deposited, and these 3 other wallets, Thiel, Andreessen, Asimov, also received them. Now, there's a couple of others as well here. So you've got Sagan, Faraday, Turing. Very interesting names to pick to receive these large quantities of XRP. Most people go, oh, well, they're just random. They're not random at all. These guys are obsessed with these guys. You know, modern day pioneers in the sciences. Tesla was almost called Faraday. You've got Saxi. I used to read Isaac Asimov stories every single day. Isaac Asimov, one of the, he's an author of science fiction novels, very prolific and well-known in that community. Elon absolutely loved Isaac Asimov as well. Carl Sagan, another one. Sagan was awesome. These are the people that inspired Elon and Thiel. And how is it that these wallets are named after their inspirations? Again, these weird breadcrumbs that are just left there. And you're probably thinking, oh, you know, like 15 million XRP scattered across these wallets. That's not all that much. Whatever. Most of it hasn't been sold. And if it truly is going to be worth what we know it's going to be worth, it is a serious deal. And they got given it for free. So they wouldn't have purchased this, of course. And they're happy to just sit on it as it stands. The other interesting thing to note is when you do deep dive into these wallets, there has been a couple of sales. And one of the sales was right before the top in 2018. And they also did a sale right before the local top in December of 2024. So clearly privy to some sort of inside knowledge. The wallet behavior doesn't just act like that by chance. Now, this becomes more interesting because these guys also like this sort of troll idea of leaving their scent. And as I touched on before, Thiel's companies are all named after the Lord of the Rings. Palantir, Valor Ventures, Mithril Capital, Lambas, Rivendell, Adra, Anduril, and Narya Capital. What are the chances that the 404 error on the XRP scan wallet site is a J.R. Tolkien quote? All that is gold does not glitter, not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither, deep roots are not reached by the frost. Very strange coincidence. And, you know, again, this philosophical point and obsession from Musk around X and how it links to XRP. X stands for everything, borderless, supranational. The one thing that can actually fulfill that is XRP. And we're all privy to the symbology and its clear links back to Ripple and indeed even Stellar. So pretty quickly you start to go, okay, these guys aren't mucking around when it comes to ensuring that the final puzzle piece to their philosophy is fulfilled. And I also don't think it's coincidence that you have, you know, a lot of Elon's companies being linked to the DoD through SpaceX, and you wonder why they don't say much about it. You know, like they've talked about Bitcoin in the past, but there's never really been this posturing of a cryptographic solution yet. And I think that's intentional. I think it's very much locked under NDA. And we're starting to see and sniff the early phases of the mainstream narrative changing. No more notably than the recent shift in sort of libertarian Bitcoin views to maybe this thing's hijacked. And there's a couple of key examples here. We have the Roger Ver flip, which I've touched on before. Roger Ver being pretty much the earliest ever investor in Bitcoin. Also, as we touched on in the part one, Roger being a angel investor in Ripple. He has clearly stated he feels it's been hijacked. The wallets sold Bitcoin just over 120,000. Not completely confirmed, but we can deduce that that's likely. What does he know? All these legacy wallets that have been dumping recently. And he's embarrassed to promote Bitcoin to people. Interesting. Tucker himself, he's in the past been sort of open to the idea of Bitcoin, but now thinks that it's CIA created, a full backflip on where he once was. Peter Thiel himself, the man of the moment that we're discussing. 2021, I'm a pro-crypto, pro-Bitcoin maxi. And now in 2024, just last year, I worry that Bitcoin's been co-opted by ESG forces. We then, of course, this week have the Epstein links come out. We also know on top of this that Epstein gave 40 mil to Valor Ventures, one of Thiel's firms, which has appreciated handsomely into just under 200 million. Elon was embroiled in this as well, and Steve Bannon. So there's this clear effort to subvert the existing narrative for a reason. And I think that reason is very much to do with this push towards the regulated landscape. And what's super interesting about that idea is that whilst Ripple were going through this long-winded lawsuit, Thiel had launched this crypto exchange called Bullish. And Bullish is now IPO'd. Mike Novogratz, who's a massive Ripple investor, never sold any of his shares, huge XRP proponent, also in on Bullish. This was being tested over in Gibraltar for the last 6 years. Miguel Vance, Ripple's former head of XRP markets, joins DAM Gibraltar. All these testing rollouts and simulations were run, finally culminating this year. Bullish partnership with Gibraltar.gov to develop world's first regulation for clearing and settlement of derivative contracts. What I see this as is this clear proving ground in Gibraltar as a means to go back to the US within his intelligence apparatus and go, this thing works, let's do it here. Furthermore to this, what are the chances that right whilst the lawsuit had kicked off at this conglomerate called the Aspen Security Forum via the Aspen Institute, which we will get into in a second. This is the old school intelligence origins that come out. Brad Garlinghouse and Gary Gensler spoke at this conference whilst this Gibraltar stuff was going on 2 different panels, and it was all about this kind of compliance and regulation angle. So in my mind, this has all been planned from day one, and they've literally run the simulations out whilst we've all been diverted to look at the shiny meme coins and NFTs and, moon Lambos and all the crap. But this is where it's all heading. And I think as we talk today on Friday, 21st of November at 2:30 p.m., we have a real scenario where the markets are about to go into free fall. The reverse carry trade that Jay Claver talks about is potentially unwinding. Volatility could be huge. Most people will get shaken out, and the new system could seriously just be around the corner if this liquidity crisis really kicks off. So it all starts to become very, very clear. And what I might add before we come back to this component of the board is this further assurance that this is what they want to achieve by the installment of one JD Vance. And we know JD Vance is Thiel's man, like literal protege. Goes back to his Yale law days. Vance worked at Mithril Capital and then launched his own VC off the back of Thiel. Thiel gave 15 mil to Vance's Senate run. And Vance is now positioned as Thiel's man in Washington. And as touched on in the intro, if it all plays out, this is through till 2036. They've got 12 years of runway. Vance is publicly crypto. He has pushed for this regulatory landscape to be changed. And it's all seemingly lining up. They've got Saxy in as the crypto czar, of course, ex-PayPal mafia. The language choices that I've pointed out is very Ripple-centric. Clear rules of the road, leveled the playing field, updated archaic payment system. They all say the same shtick, and it's clear that the installments are all there. Pair that with everything we covered in part 1, the more obscure installments, you start to see where we're heading. Then, of course, on top of this, we had Ripple contributing $50 million to the election cycle through Fairshake. They hedged, of course. Larson gave some cash to Camilla. Everyone blew up. It's 5D chess. They're backing both ways, so that they're not losing either way. But they were much more heavy on the Republican side. Interesting through Fairshake, a lot of crossover through the early investors as well. Andreessen there, Kraken. So, and then of course all of our photos that we love so much, seeing Brad there with Trumpy and Alderati. We got Brad there with Vance, and donation articles. So the modern day stage is certainly set, and I thought this would be a good time now, after painting that picture, to pivot back towards the more historic intelligence links that will paint the picture even clearer. And we're going to start here in the 90s with a chunk of work that Ido's touched on in the past. And this is through Ripple Communications, a trademark that was acquired by Ripple Labs later on, provable. And a link to Ripple Communications CEO, still is CEO, this lady, Karen Nussel. Now, the reason this Karen Nussel is important is because when she was there at Ripple Communications, Ripple Pay, classic Ripple Pay, was a Ripple Communications company. So why is that? Why are they linked? We have a lawsuit linked to this trademark, and we know for a fact Karen Nussel is involved. But this gets much more interesting when we go into the intelligence arms. Karen Nussel is linked to INSA, which is an intelligence and national security alliance. It was formed in 2005 in the Bush era, basically through corporate membership, sponsorships, and a big part of that is Booz Allen Hamilton, who our boy Greg Kidd worked for, who we touched on in part 1, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Palantir, Microsoft, all of these guys fund INSA. Edward Snowden, most famously, he worked for Booz Allen Hamilton as well. This is a serious deal. It's a big think tank. It's a conglomerate of intelligence agencies. Why is this important? Because this INSA mob links directly over to the Aspen Security Forum / Aspen Global Leadership Network. We have a clear link here, Karen Nussel, still listed on the Aspen Institute, and within the Aspen Global Leadership Network, which is basically like this, it runs fellowships. So each region or agency that's involved in this go off and try to bring something new or bring insight to the conglomerate each year into these think tanks. We've had a ex-Ripple CFO there, Christina Campbell, and more recently, one of the big nuggets here is this Brooks Entwistle, who's a Ripple Senior Vice President and Managing Director at Ripple. And he served as the Vice Chairman on at the Board of Trustees of the Aspen Institute. This is super important because Brooksy then moved over to EQT on the board. Now, EQT is the fund, it's the Wallenberg fund, one of Sweden's most powerful and wealthy families. Jacob Wallenberg is on the board of his fund, of course, but he is also on the board of the Trilateral Commission. Now, where does Jacob Wallenberg fit in? He also fits in down here, Trilateral Commission. But he also sits with his brother on the Bilderberg Steering Committee, Wallenberg. So there you have a chain reaction link through what I like to call all of the arms talking to one another. Like, you just saw a big ripple effect, excuse the pun. And the reason this is quite profound is because this goes deeper back to the Bush era. Karen Nussel is married to Jimmy Nussel. Jimmy Nussel worked under Bush to 2007. This is important because when Jimmy Nussel wrapped up in government, he went to work and become the CEO of CUNA, America's credit unions, the biggest US credit union trade body. Now, CUNA was the backer of CU Ledger. You get where I'm going with this? CU Ledger chose to use R3 Corda to support domestic and cross-border transactions. Yes. Ripple and CU Ledger join Hyperledger blockchain project. R3 and Ripple settle down for Universal Payments app. We know they had their little legal back and forth, but R3 prioritize and only use XRP for their settlements. Now, what are the chances? This guy's still in control of CUNA, by the way, and thus directly involved with CU Ledger. Go check out the immense work from Jay Claver on the importance of R3 Corda and the importance of the credit union arms. But to me, this is a mini smoking gun. This is like, we're going back to Bush era and how this is all played out into present day, plus the cross-link to Karen's side and how this feeds into the Aspen Global Leadership Network, and then the links within there, and then the links to Wallenberg, back to Trilateral Commission, into Bilderberg Group, Aspen Security Forum, also talking, right here, this is Thiel speaking at the Aspen's Ideas Festival under the Aspen Institute. It's like, wait, what? So this is the selection. This is when you start to see that there's much more going on here. It's this preparedness for the new system, whether it's this liquidity crunch that we're about to go into, or it's the slow rollout. It doesn't matter. They're ready to rock and roll. And the puzzle pieces have been connecting for a long, long time. So that one there should leave you a little bit awestruck. And it only gets further complemented within the Trump administration with some of the Bukele Bitcoin experiments, I think, that have been conducted. If you remember correctly as well, that El Salvador in 2021 tried to use Bitcoin as legal tender, and then they rejected it 4 years later, earlier this year, because it simply didn't work. The reason I think that all happened was because of this Ronald Douglas Johnson, who was appointed US ambassador to El Salvador by Trumpy in 2019, and he has strong intelligence links as well. So again, I think this is like a little cherry piece of evidence to suggest that there's this concerted narrative distraction that they want to keep in lockstep with the broader market so that we don't lift the lid and see the underbelly. That's not to say Bitcoin goes to zero and crashes. I don't think that happens, but I definitely think it fizzles into irrelevancy, and it's not going to be bolstering the majority of the crypto ecosystem and market cap in the future. So those links should start to get you really humming and going, what is actually happening here? But the next piece is one of the biggest kickers. And this is going back to Thiel and a group he started in 2006, if I'm not mistaken. This group is called Dialogue. And Dialogue is really interesting because it's basically the Tech Bilderberg group. It brings people together from intelligence communities once a year to really guide where they think things are going. Super private, super exclusive. We can even look at the joining note and some of the rhetoric in here. Dialogue's mission is to help leaders learn and become more effective. It does so by facilitating deep, off-the-record conversations for influential participants who vary in background and ideology. Since its founding in 2006 by Peter Thiel and Oren Hoffman, Dialogue has gathered thousands of leaders in political, business, tech, creative, military, and academic disciplines from 50-plus countries for invite-only retreats. These off-the-record retreats have no speeches or panels. Rather, participants engage in breakout sessions moderated by fellow participants. This gets crazy because who was at one of the earliest Dialogue conferences? Brad Garlinghouse. Brad Garlinghouse attended a conference organized by Oren Hoffman and Peter Thiel called Dialogue. The retreat was small, perhaps 10 to 12 people around a conference table, and had a session in 2012 or 2013 on Bitcoin, which was new to him at the time, right around the time when they invested in Ripple. Very, very strange. It's an interesting cross-section of government, military, and techies. Brad had never heard of Bitcoin at the time. Well, just 3 years later, he gets installed as the CEO of Ripple. And it was clearly linked to this conference early on. And as I've said, I think he was pre-selected. The reason this is interesting is because you've got this Oren Hoffman figure who does have a bit of a presence online, but you don't really know he's involved with this dialogue group. You know, one article says it's very hard to keep track of Oren Hoffman. He has many professional associates, and he's been Peter Thiel's party planner. You know, Oren Hoffman is everywhere. What's his deal? I don't know anything about him other than the fact that he seems to know everyone. One article written by the man himself, best place to host a dinner party is at your home. Even if you live in a tiny cramped apartment, you want to control as much of the environment as possible. Really important that everyone can hear each other really well. Acoustics matter. Additions, get photos of everyone at the dinner and send it to them afterwards. Bonus, give a little gift to everyone. So I'm speculating, but is this character like a modern day Epstein handler? I don't know. I'm not saying unequivocally, but it's just interesting. There's also an additional associate, this Christian Bailey guy. That's not his real name. He's an Israeli intel asset, and he's Hoffman's good friend. And there's some crazy stuff that is going on there. I can't find much on this figure. But this dialogue group also has links to this Simone Haruko Collins, who was born in Japan. Easter egg, we know of the crazy Japanese links. We know through SBI, and where are our SBI friends over here? They love XRP. Yoshitaka Kitao, every bank will use Ripple's XRP, their investment arm. Tomio Asakura, this is not just another crypto, this is the wealth transfer of our generation. They own 9% of Ripple shares. They also happen to be, in Japan, the largest non-sovereign holder of US debt. And that seems to be unraveling right before our very eyes with the Japanese bond yield skyrocketing. So it's all just crazy. And this dialogue group, to me, is like the modern day amalgam that represents, I guess, a more dynamic tech, secretive alliance. And who knows what really goes on at this dialogue group, because it's very seldom covered and very seldom talked about. And we know Brad was at one of the earliest ones, which is just absolutely wild to even think about. So to me, it's undeniable that this thing was selected from the beginning. We covered it in the first part with Schwartzy, 1988 patent, all the crossover there, all the XRP law, all the funding rounds, all the links to intelligence, all the links to economic amalgams. And you sort of just sit there and you go, well, this is either going to completely destroy civilization or it's going to liberate us. Logically, that is where we now sit. What are we going to do? And I think high level, the US have a very, very, very big problem that they need to fix. They need urgently to figure out this debt demand problem. And I think that we are on the cusp of all the cards being laid out. And XRP is the secret weapon to really save them from this impending liquidity crisis. But then you're probably thinking, well, where do we all fit in and where do we end up? And I think that's the ultimate beauty of this whole piece. And God's endgame is going to be beautiful. Just like Moses, when he parted the Red Sea, he had no idea that that was going to be the pathway to escape from the Pharaoh. And just like Moses put the serpent on the pole in the desert to the Israelites that had been bitten by snakes after roaming the desert for 40 years, he said, look directly at what afflicts and hurts you, and that will cure them, as God instructed him to do that. Jesus specifically references this in his teachings, saying that just like Moses put the serpent on the pole, the Son of Man will also be raised up on a pole so that the human condition can stare directly at what is killing them. And what we are doing right now is staring directly into the underbelly of the corrupt financial cabal that has had us by the balls for as long as any human alive can remember. We have understood it. We have picked it apart. We have addressed it. We have meticulously cross-referenced it. And by doing so, I personally believe I see the cure being written in the stone as XRP. More on that in part 3 when we tackle the full scope and the historical references of God's Endgame. But that's where we stand. I hope you enjoyed part 2, and I will see you for the massive finale in this master web.